So tomorrow is 4th of July, our Independence Day as a nation, when we celebrate the Declaration of Independence, which was a legal proceeding and document declaring that the United States of America, at the time 13 colonies, was independent from England, its imperial governing nation, and its king at the time, King George III. Now, this document was ratified by the Second Continental Congress on July 4th. You guessed it. You know the year. 1776. Very good. You guys paid attention in history. Okay? I didn't, so I looked this up on Wikipedia. But do you know how many years between the Declaration of Independence and actual independence there were? Because it's one thing as a country to say, we declare ourselves independent of England's power and King George is no longer our king. We're going to govern ourselves. So they declared this. The Second Continental Congress, the local governing body, had declared this. But how many more years did it take to finally, truly become free from England? Well, it took 7 years. The Revolutionary War ended on September 3rd, 1783, with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. 7 years had passed from the declaring of independence and freedom from England to the actual living of the full freedom from England, the full autonomy. And to reach this time of peace, this time of rest from England and from war, which had been so imagined in this document. The Declaration of Independence had this idea of what our nation could possibly look like, free from the clutches of England. But before that, there was a time of strife and a time of a lot of valiant effort and work to get to this point. And today we're going to be in the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to be in chapter 2, verses 23 up until 3, verse 6. There are two passages that we're going to look at today that are closely related, and really we could see them as one passage rather than kind of in our Bibles we have these subtitles, which were not in the original text, by the way. These subtitles were given by other people reading the Bible and saying, oh yeah, this looks like a logical section. And a lot of times I think they're accurate, but I really think these two texts, these two passages are one passage in Mark's mind. They're one thought in Mark's mind. And as many of you know, we're going through a series trying to understand what Mark is telling us about Jesus. That's why the series is called Jesus Unfiltered, which means that we're not trying to see Jesus through the eyes of our culture or through the eyes of some other filter, right? Like you can, on Instagram, you have all these filters. Some of them are funny. Some of them make you look, nicer than you really look. No, we want the real Jesus. We don't want the filtered Jesus, and that's what Mark is trying to give us. And here, Mark talks about a new kind of Sabbath that Jesus introduces. So let's look together, starting in verse 23 of chapter 2. It says this: One Sabbath, he, Jesus, was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And he said to them, Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priests to eat. Also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, Come here. And he said to them, Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill? But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, Stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. the Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. So we see here that the main issue in contention is the Sabbath. We're in a section of 5 different things that Jesus purposefully does in order to scandalize the Pharisees and the Jews of his day. Because they had an idea of what the kingdom was supposed to look like and what the Messiah was supposed to look like, and Jesus didn't fit that idea. And Jesus purposefully didn't want to fit that idea. He didn't want to live up to their expectations. He wanted to dash their expectations so that they could receive who he really was and who the kingdom really was. And that's what he's in the process of doing. And so he's walking through this field with his disciples, and they're on the day of the Sabbath. Now, many of you might know what the Sabbath is or was in the Old Testament, but I'm going to explain it to you, and we can just kind of refresh together, maybe if you've already heard these, about what the Sabbath is. First of all, it was one of the 10 commandments to abstain from work on the 7th day of the week. It was a commandment given to the people of Israel. You will not work on Saturday, which is the day of the Sabbath. That's the 7th day of the week. You will do work on all of the other 6 days, but on Saturday you will do no work. And you will dedicate this time to the Lord. And this is a command that God had given them, and it's a command within what they call the Decalogue, or the 10 Commandments, the most important, the essential commandments within the law of God. So it was a command to abstain from work on the 7th day. But this was also based on something that God had already done in the creative order. This command was given to them after they have been released from the power of Egypt. They have been freed from the power of Egypt, and he gives them this command. But before that, at the beginning of creation, God had rested on the 7th day. You might remember the account of creation. The first day he creates thus and thus. The second day he does this. The third day he's working. He's creating. He is forming the order of the universe according to his good design. And then on the 7th day, he takes a step back, and he's like, this is good work. I did good work, and on this day, I'm not working. I'm resting. And I'm resting, and I'm going to enjoy the work of my hands. And so God himself, within the created order, had established a day of rest. Now, did God need to rest? Of course, he doesn't need to. He's God. He's all-powerful. He has no need to rest. He has no need within him to replenish. His resources are eternal, without end. His power is without end. So he doesn't need to rest, but he rests as an example for us because we are created in this created order with the need for rest. Unlike God, we are finite. Our resources are not eternal. We do not have all the power in the world to do the things that we want. Within our created order by God, we need to rest. And he gives us this example in the created order. So what can we say the purpose of the Sabbath in the Old Testament was? Well, the first one is obvious. It's rest. In fact, the word Sabbath means to cease and desist, to stop. Like, don't do any more. Put your tools down. Go home. Turn your computer off. Turn your phone off, which is impossible, right? But like, leave it behind. You need to stop. Leave it all behind for a second and rest. You need this. That was the first purpose. The second purpose is to focus on God and the worship of God. So it was to cease all of your labors and to spend time, a rhythm, right, of every 7 days in focusing and worshiping God. Because we're so blinded by our work, by the needs of today, by this temporal reality that we have, that we oftentimes forget our Creator. And we need this time to stop, to enjoy the work of our hands just like God did, and enjoy our God, who gave us both the work and the fruit of our work. So it's to rest, it's to focus on God. And there's also another element, which is dependence on God. Because just like, maybe some of us, we can if I work more, I can get more. I have to keep working so that I can always provide for my means, for the things that I need, or for my family. I can't stop working. The more I work, the more I'll get. The more I'll get, the more secure I'll be. The more secure I am, the better I'll feel. The happier I'll be. And in our society, we see this like workaholics. You've heard that term. People who just never stop working. They're always working either because of their pride or their ambition, or a lot of times their fear, right? That if I stop working, then I won't be able to provide for my needs or for my family, or I won't be able to build some sort of inheritance for them. It's this fear, and so the Sabbath was a way of saying, no, stop it, let it go. You're still not the owner of your life. The God that breathed breath into your nostrils is the one who has given you the strength to be able to work, who's given the mind to you to be able to think and create. He is the one that you depend on, not yourself. And so the Sabbath is a way of saying, stop. You're not it. God is. Rest in Him. Another purpose of the Sabbath oftentimes was time with family. Because if you had a father who was out tending the flocks all week, or if you had somebody who was outside of the house, their work was outside of the house, this was a time for everybody to come together as a family. And you recenter yourself on God, but you also recenter yourself with each other as a family, with your relationship. It's a time to reconnect with one another. And there were two main things that separated the nation of Israel from all of the other nations. There were other things like the food laws, but two main things, and that was circumcision and the Sabbath. Because all of the other nations did not have a Sabbath. They didn't have a day off. Maybe the leaders did. The leaders had all the days off they wanted, but not the slaves, not the animals. You could just, you guys just keep working while I'm over here enjoying the fruit of your labor. But Israel, the command actually went to all peoples. It's you need to stop, and you need to allow your servants to stop working. They're not working this day either. And even your animals, you need to give your animals a day of rest. Don't exploit them. They all get rest from God. They all get a Sabbath. And so the purpose there is to mark God's people as a different people than others. So what had the Sabbath become, though? All of those things, and when we think about the Sabbath, we're like, man, those purposes sound good. I really like the Sabbath, but the Sabbath had become something that it was never intended to become. And in this, you can see that the Pharisees, they're squawking at Jesus and His disciples because they feel like they're not accomplishing the Sabbath like they're supposed to. They're like, well, yeah, you guys are not following the Sabbath law. That's exactly what they said, right? They say in verse 25, have you never read? Oh, that's Jesus. The Pharisees in verse 24 were saying to Him, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? Why are they breaking the Sabbath? What were they doing that they thought was not lawful? Well, they were probably doing two things. One is that they're walking too far. Did you know that in this time of Jesus, and I'll quote from one of the commentaries I read this week, walking more than 1,999 paces, or approximately 800 meters, was considered a journey, and hence a breach of the Sabbath. Nowhere in Scripture did it say you can only walk 199 paces. But the Pharisees were like, we just want to make sure you're resting, so now we're going to give you a new law. It's not God's law, but it's a tradition, and so you need to follow it. Because it's like God's law. It interprets God's law. So it's the same thing. So you can only walk 199 paces. I don't know who's counting. But according to them, they're out walking in a field, and they're just incensed, like, well, what are you doing walking around? You're on a journey. You're breaking the Sabbath. But also, they were plucking grain from their walk. They're along the way. They're a little hungry, so they start plucking the heads of grain. And, some of us are a little far removed from our food production, so we wouldn't know how to eat grain if we just saw it out there, right? But according to, other people, not me, because I've never done this, but you pluck the grain, and then what do you have to do? Some of you might know. You have to rub it, right? Because it takes the grain out of its shell, and then you get the good part, the food part. And then you can eat it. In fact, it almost kind of turns into like a gum substance. One time I did try that, okay? And so you can eat it. And that's what they're doing. Now, it wasn't illegal. Ironically speaking, I think this is actually really fascinating to me. In a very individualistic culture, we would find this difficult. But in the Old Testament, it was okay for you to go into your neighbor's field and pluck a few heads of grain. was okay, as long as you didn't bring a sickle, right? Like that's what it says, because if you're bringing a sickle, it means you're harvesting quite a bit of their grain, and at that point you're stealing. But if it's just a little bit, you need a snack, you know? You don't even have to ask your neighbor, hey, can I have a few heads of grain? You just can pluck it. So they're not incensed of the fact that they're doing that. They're incensed that they're rubbing it together. Because this is food production, right? This is the great chef, right? Just like getting some grain. This is what they're doing. And so they're like, how can you be doing this on the Sabbath? If you wanted grain, you should have done this the day before. You should have prepared this on Friday so that you could have it on Saturday, but you guys are all a bunch of lazy Jews and you're breaking the Sabbath. How can you possibly do that? Because breaking the Sabbath in the Old Testament was a very serious law to break. But that shows us that the Sabbath had become an overly legalistic, pious observance. It's another way for the Pharisees to seem very holy when their hearts were really very far from God. It was another way. Like, if we can do all these things and all these rules, and if we pile on the rules for everybody else, and we look like we're following all of them very closely, we'll look better than they do. We'll look more spiritual than they do. Obviously, this is not probably a conscious thought. It's a subconscious thought. But they're guilty. They're guilty of judging Jesus' disciples based on a non-biblical law to make themselves look better. That's called hypocrisy. They were looking for an outward holiness. And also, I think, when legalism is in play, and legalism is judging people based on how they are accomplishing the outward signs of holiness. And if you don't, then you're bad, and I'm good. So if legalism is a way of life, a lot of times it's because there's control involved. I want to control you. I want to be your Lord because I am in a higher spiritual place than you are. You're on a lower spiritual place, and I control you. I am your Lord. And for a Jew, Sabbath had become one of the biggest reasons that they showed the nations that they were different. And rather than their justice, rather than the character of God flowing through their lives, changing, transforming the world, it was about this outward observance. I am a Jew because I observe the Sabbath. Look how amazing I am. But I'll feel self-righteous to reject your poor and the alien. I won't even touch somebody who comes from another country because they're unclean. And yet God says, I want you to be a light to the nations. And they said, well, I observed the Sabbath. I accomplished the letter of the law. Aren't you pleased with me? And God says, no, I want mercy, not sacrifice. I don't want your sacrifices. I want you to follow me for the real reasons that the Sabbath exists, not to make yourself look better. If the Sabbath means that the character of God will flow in me and out of me better, then observe the Sabbath with all scrutiny. But if it causes you to be judgmental and hateful towards people who really aren't breaking the Sabbath, I don't want none of it. So the Sabbath actually can be bad. That's our first point. We can make the Sabbath bad, just like humans can make anything that God creates bad. Any law that he creates, we can actually somehow, in our sinfulness, twist it and make it bad. And that's what the Pharisees had been doing. And then Jesus confronts them and he says, no, I'm sorry, boys, this is not how it works. The Sabbath is actually good, it's not bad. That's our second point, that the Sabbath is good. And he says, in one statement, he says, the whole purpose of the Sabbath, he says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And it just totally makes sense. I love how Jesus just has one-liners, and it completely rearranges the map for everybody. He's like, the Sabbath, man was not made for this law. Like, we want the law to be glorified. The law is the purpose. The law was made for man. And that's with any law, not just the Sabbath. All of God's laws are made for man, not man for the law. The purpose of the law was for God's character to be expressed to man. Now, oftentimes man could never measure up to God's perfect expression, his perfect ideal, because we're imperfect. And that's why Jesus had to come in. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But the law is good. It's not bad. The law is not the end. Jesus is better than the law. We just read that, right? Jesus is better than the law. But the law in and of itself is not bad. It's good. And the Sabbath is not bad. It's good. It's good for you. Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. I mean, notice that it's interesting that when Israel is called out of slavery, that this law is given to them. What would life have been like under the Egyptian rule? They were slaves. They were whipped. They were wrung out for every little drop of energy that they could possibly give the Egyptians. Have you ever thought about the pyramids and how they were made? I mean, I saw this thing the other day showing like what one block of stone to make the pyramids would look like, and it's just enormous. And it's just tons and tons and tons of weight. And they would have to drag this. Who? Slaves. So the Israeli existence before God liberates them from the Egyptians was absolute slavery, not a day off. It was the worst dehumanizing work you can possibly imagine. And if they died, it didn't matter. We have more. There was no consideration for the person working. They were just a means to the end of erecting these amazing things. And we look at them as amazing, but then when we think about how they were built, I'm not sure how amazing they are. It's like when I go to Las Vegas and I see all these amazing buildings. It's like, oh, how beautiful in this mountain. And then I'm like, oh yeah, everybody's life savings went into this. And I'm like, I'm not saying it's bad to go to Las Vegas. You can go if you want. I'm just saying when I'm there, I'm looking at all these buildings and I'm looking at all the ruined lives that built these buildings. It makes them not as pretty. And that's what happened with the Egyptians and the Israelites. They were expended. These lives were expended. And then God says, no, you're mine. I'm rescuing you from these oppressors, and you're mine, and I'm giving you a Sabbath. You have a day off. In fact, I'm commanding you. You must rest. I'm liberating you from having to work, from being expendable. It's this justice that God is doing for them. On their behalf, the Sabbath is good. And ultimately, it's a recognition of our finiteness. We talked a little bit about that God is eternal, but we are not. We're finite, and we need to recognize that. And that recognition is stopping and resting. So how is the Sabbath good for us? Well, it's a stop striving and be still. Stop striving so much and just be still and meditate on me. That's how it's good for us. Another way it's good for us is that we do the opposite of what work is for us. In fact, if you ask me, after a week sitting in my office chair and reading commentaries and preparing messages and doing meetings, you can imagine that my work doesn't give me a lot of physical exercise. Mm-hmm. It's not like, Eric is working, we're working together now, so it's not like he says, hey, Sasha, we need to do, our burpees for the day, okay? We don't do that. My work is very sedentary. So what would rest look like for me? The opposite of that. Rest, for me, a lot of times, is a fly fishing pole and a really great river. That's what rest is for me. Rest is like getting out and doing things. And to be honest, sometimes after a week of sitting down, the only thing I want to do is continue to sit down. Which is weird. It's ironic, right? Like I should want to get out. But I don't. And God says, no, this is not good for you. You need to rest. Which is, for me, is different. Now, if you work like in construction all week long, and you're out in the elements, and you're hoisting, like joists and all these kinds of things, and you have a very physical kind of work, what would rest mean for you? It probably means getting on a recliner somewhere, right? And maybe watching some TV and a sweet nap. That's what rest is for you. So rest is doing the opposite, I think, in some cases, of what our work is. But that's not going to look like rest to other people. Like, how could you be doing that on the Sabbath? Which is kind of what's happening with Jesus' disciples. We have to leave our work and let God take over whatever is hanging or undone. This is what the Sabbath means. And this is really hard. And I can tell you as a pastor, a lot of times this happens to me, where my work week ends on Thursday. I pick it back up on Sunday, right? So my first day of my work week is today, right? And then I end on Thursday. And I have Friday and Saturday technically off. And in those days, what happens in my mind? I'm still thinking about things. I'm still dragging my sermon along, right? Like I've got it mostly done, but there's still some things I need to do. And I'm worrying. Well, I wonder how these people are. So there's no resting for me. Unless I stop and say, no, I got to stop. I got to desist. I've got to cease working, which is what Sabbath means. I need to Sabbath. And now you can see that Sabbath in the New Testament is not like it was in the Old Testament. Sabbath was an ordained day. Now I think that Sabbath in the New Testament has become a verb. You need to Sabbath. You need to go and Sabbath. For all of the purposes that the Sabbath was made for, it's a principle. You need to Sabbath. Because in my case, I don't Sabbath on Sunday. I'm working, right? How could I possibly Sabbath on a Sunday when I need to preach? It's not possible unless I have somebody else preach. Then I can Sabbath, right? But I can't. So I need to Sabbath some other time. But I need to because it's good for me. The Sabbath is good. It's a principle in the New Testament. Did you know that the early church began replacing the old Sabbath observance with the meeting of the first day of the month, not the last day? And do you know what the first day of the week, not month. You know what the first day of the week is? It's technically Sunday. But for us in our mind, it's really the end of the week, right? Or at least in my mind. But and why did the early church transition from observing the Sabbath like good Jews, and why did they start worshiping on Sunday? Because that's the day that Jesus rose from the dead. So Jesus, ironically, accomplished his work on the Sabbath. And then he resurrected to new life on the first day. So the New Testament stopped following the Sabbath as this set-apart day, as this Old Testament command, but now they morphed it into this principle of meeting still one day a week, worshiping God, probably stopping their work, but maybe not, because, in the Roman world, they didn't celebrate Sabbath. So maybe some of them were still working on Sundays, but they still got together with the community, but they were Sabbathing, if that's a word, it's not, but I'm making it up, okay? If they were Sabbathing, they were practicing Sabbath, this principle of Sabbath, in other parts of their week. And you're like, well, okay, that sounds really great, but I have a lot of things to do. And you know what God's command to you is? Stop. Just stop. At some point in your week, you've got to stop. You know what? There'll still be work tomorrow. You'll get to it. Trust God. Stop. Chick-fil-A is famous for not being open on Sundays, and sometimes I forget and try to go there anyway, right? You've done it too, right? And you're like, oh, that's right. Why do they do this? Oh, yeah, it's a good thing. They don't work on Sundays, and you're like, man, that's got to be bad for business. Can you imagine? So many Chick-fil-A's all throughout the nation, completely closed, every single week, one day a week. Did you know that they're doing okay? Have you noticed? Every time I drive by there, they literally have 3 drive-through lines going. And anytime I go into Chick-fil-A, it's always busy, always, to the brim. So there's a principle there that if you stop working and you dedicate this time to God, right, and you Sabbath, that God's going to take care of you. If you recognize that the blessing and the power and the ability all comes from Him, and you give Him this day, He will give it back to you in ways that you can't possibly imagine. You just got to stop. This is the example from the Old Testament and the manna. Remember that God would say, I'm going to give you manna, this bread from heaven, while you're in the desert. You have no way to get food. I'm going to take care of you. It's going to be on the floor every day in this dew. It's just bread kind of, I don't know, like energy bar kind of stuff, I'm assuming, right? And you go grab it, and that'll be your food for the day. And you just you don't need to take more, because if you take more, it's going to spoil. So you just take what you need for the day, what your family needs for the day. And then he says, on the day before the Sabbath, right, on Friday, you go out and you collect twice as much as you need. And I will provide twice as much on that day for you. I will provide enough that you can get twice as much, so that on the Sabbath, when you dedicate this time to me, that there'll be plenty for you. And that's the principle. You can't outgive God. And he says, hey, stop. Sabbath with me. Sabbath for you. This is for you. It's good. You will get it back. Now, our third point is that Sabbath is a good time to do good. And in the next passage that we see, where there's this, they're like in a synagogue, which would be kind of like a church service, and one man in the synagogue has this withered hand, and who knows how long he's had it? Could have been all his life. And Jesus sees him, and he knows the Pharisees are kind of looking at him, so Jesus is like, okay, here we go. You want to throw down? Watch this, right? And so he calls the man with the withered hand out, and he asks them, before he heals him, he says, is it lawful to do good or to do evil on the Sabbath? And who is going to say, evil, right? Like, nobody's going to say that. But they also don't want to say good, because then, well, if we say good, then his point is kind of proven, and then we're going to look bad. So they just kind of sit there and don't say anything. Why? Because their hearts are hardened. They don't have anything to do with the true Messiah. They want to have everything to do with their own self-righteousness. They're holding so tightly to their self-righteousness that they can't let it go and receive Jesus. And so Jesus says, okay, well, just to show you, first of all, to prove the point that I'm Lord of the Sabbath, because he just said, right? Not only is Sabbath good for man, but I'm Lord. I am king. I decide the Sabbath. If I want to break the Sabbath, I can, because I'm in control. I'm the one that does this. And so he says, so just so you know that it's good to do something good on the Sabbath, and also that I'm Lord of the Sabbath, he heals the man with the withered hand. So let me ask you, was healing work for Jesus? I mean, in some ways, no, right? Because he's God. He has this full power of God within him. But he's also fully human, and we see that he sleeps. We see that after an intense time of ministry, he would say, hey guys, we need to go Sabbath together. We need to get away and rest, because, man, we're worn out. So we don't know if it was effort for him or not, but we do know that he is purposefully breaking the Sabbath in their eyes. Because for a Jew to create something on the Sabbath is work. That's why, like, if you're creating a meal, like by rubbing the heads of grain, you're starting to create a meal, that's work. You can't do that on the Sabbath. So he says no creative work. I got the opportunity to go to Israel when I was a freshman in college. And it was an incredible experience. And we went to the Old City, and we went to the Wailing Wall, which is the Wailing Wall is right next to what the Temple Mount used to be. And so right now, the Temple Mount, that area, is controlled by the Muslims. And so they can't go there and worship. And so what they come is that they wail, right? Just lamenting the fact that they can't go and worship on the Temple Mount. But they forgot, I mean, they haven't seen that Jesus came and he was the true temple. And if they had just done that, they wouldn't wail anymore, right? But this is what they do. And I remember my guide told me, I was in college, freshman in college, and my guide told us, do not take a picture of any Jews on the Sabbath. Because for them, if they are a part of a picture that's a creative work, they have done work on the Sabbath. And you have caused them to break the Sabbath. And I was like, okay, I won't do that. And my mind's like, I can't wait to take a picture of somebody, right? I was a snarky freshman. And so I went, and I was close to the Temple Mount, and this group of boys was coming up. And I kind of like tried to be like hidden about it. And I just like did, I wasn't looking. I like made sure the focus is good. And I just snapped a picture. And one of the kids realized that I did it. And he looked at me with this horror, this face of horror. And he's like, what are you doing? And he starts yelling at me. You can't take a picture of me on the Sabbath. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was that serious. But for him, I caused him to sin. I caused him to break the Sabbath because it was creative work. And here Jesus is recreating this man's withered hand. He is causing it to become a healthy, sane, that's in Spanish, I'm thinking. A healthy, refurbished hand, right? Recreated, like the created order, like it was supposed to be. And what does this do for him? How long, he had lived his whole life maybe with this withered hand that he couldn't do anything with. And now it frees him. It actually causes the man with the withered hand to enter into his own peace and Sabbath himself. Finally, I have use of my hand. Finally, I've entered this peace, this physical peace in my arm that I haven't had. So Jesus says it's good to do good on the Sabbath. In fact, that's what you can do. You are called to do good on the Sabbath. How can we do good? Well, there's a really obvious one, and that is you can serve in church, right? You knew I was going to say it. You can serve in church. Because Sunday is a day for Sabbath. I'm not saying it's a law, but it's a great day to Sabbath. You come and hear the Word of God. You're with your brothers and sisters, and you can serve. You can do good on the Sabbath. It's a great time. And it's good for you. Remember, the Sabbath is good. And doing good is good. And serving in the church is good. All of these things are good. But, we do a couple things here. We do Seats to Streets, which is normally our day of worship, and we serve our community instead of worshiping. Now, some people might be upset about that. I don't think anybody is, but you might be, or other churches might think, like, what are you doing? And I think we're doing what Jesus is doing. We're serving people on the day that we would worship, because it's good to do good on the Sabbath. Homeless people received rest because we served them. How did they receive rest? Because they received rest from their loneliness when we served them on the Sabbath. They received rest from their subpar coffee. Remember that? They kept talking about how amazing this coffee was because they've gotten coffee and it wasn't good. And so they got rest from their subpar coffee, like somebody came and blessed them, kissed them with the grace of God on Sabbath. The Salvation Army, who also helps many, got some help with their facility on a Sabbath when we are doing our Sabbath. Our tired and cluttered street got a refresh, which refreshed our neighbors and myself, by the way, because I live here. And you also cleaned out that stairwell down to our basement. That was awesome, by the way. Thank you. I was refreshed because you refreshed me on a day that you normally come to the church to be refreshed. Because it's good to do good on the Sabbath. We can use any time, even times we consider rest for us, to serve and love others. In fact, we should always have our eyes, and I don't say this because I'm good at it, but we should always have our eyes keen to see needs whenever or wherever we are. Like even if we're on vacation, it's not like we're on vacation, so we're going to take a rest from doing good things or serving people. No, maybe vacation is an opportunity that God will show us new needs, that we can serve other people that are also vacationing next to us. We can do good on the Sabbath. Lastly, Jesus is our good Sabbath. In Matthew 11:28 through 30, it says this, "Come to me," Jesus is talking, "all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Did you know that this passage in Matthew is the passage that precedes the one that we just read here in Mark? So Matthew is trying to connect that Jesus is our rest with the whole Sabbath issue. So Jesus is our Sabbath. Jesus is our good Sabbath. This is how we rest in Jesus. This is how we rest in Jesus. First of all, we rest in Jesus' lordship. Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, but Jesus is Lord of all. So when we Sabbath, we rest in him. We talked about this. And think about the man who had his hand healed on the Sabbath. What do you think he did with his life? Quite possibly he said, if this man can heal my hand, then I'll just give him my whole self. He's my Lord. We rest in his lordship when we Sabbath. Jesus also gives us rest from anxiety. What is anxiety? Anxiety is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. And we all experience anxiety to different levels. And there's also another thing that accompanies it, is that it's a desire to do something, typically accompanied by unease. Like, I'm anxious, so I need to do something to try to control the situation, to try to make myself feel more secure. Well, Sabbath is saying, you know what? God, you're in control. You got everything. Take my anxiety. Take my tomorrow. Take my feeling and need to do something. You take it all. I'm going to rest in you. So you can actually you don't have to Sabbath just one day a week. Every time you feel anxious, you can Sabbath. This is a moment to Sabbath. It's a moment to go to the Lord, to rest from this situation, to rest from the consequences, the possible consequences tomorrow. Today, in this moment, I'm going to Sabbath. We also rest in Jesus' salvation for our souls, and that's what we celebrated today. We stop trying to offer other sacrifices over and over again to gain God's favor. Rather, we rest in Jesus' once and for all sacrifice for us. You know, when he said from the cross, "It is finished," he meant it. It's completely finished. All of it. Every single sin, past, present, future, is finished and covered by the blood of the Lamb. We do not need to rest in anything else. We rest alone in his sacrifice and his righteousness. And we rest in his salvation. And we rest in his second coming. We know that Jesus is going to come and make everything right again. Speaking of anxiety, we've got gas prices through the roof. We've got a war in the Ukraine that doesn't end. We've got threats of a third world war. We've got political unrest. We have all sorts of stuff going on around our country that show us that not everything is okay. How will it be okay? Will we be okay? What will our country look like in another 100 years? Will it all be okay? And Jesus says, yeah, I'm coming. Rest. Rest in me. I'm coming. And I'm going to make it all right. I'm going to restore everything to the way it was supposed to be. And I'm coming to get you if you're mine. I'm coming to get you and take you with me. So rest. Rest in his second coming. I'm going to ask the band to come up. Even though as a nation we have been free from England for almost 250 years, in many ways we still have not entered the true rest we have so diligently sought with our revolution and our independence, our Declaration of Independence. We still have enemies. We are sometimes our own worst enemy. Within our own land, we still have many injustices and tyrannical forces, even as we fight for justice and for peace. Where are we to find true rest? It is in Jesus. He is our Sabbath. As this world's nations and factions clash against each other, we will never have lasting and complete rest. But in Jesus, we can have true Sabbath. We have rest for our souls. We must find and practice our rest in Jesus.